Greetings loyal subscribers and honoured guests. Welcome back to another episode of Retrograde. I'm going to be doing something a bit different this time. Blaze released their new handheld console named the Evercade a few months ago. If you're not familiar with what this is, then I'll tell you. Blaze came up with the idea of bringing back physical cartridges, each released with their own full colour manuals and nice plastic clamshell cases. They reached out to a number of companies and licensed their games, from really big names like Atari, Namco and Data East to lesser known entities like Megacat Studios, Pico Interactive and the Bitmap Bureau, who are made up of members of the legendary Bitmap Brothers, a big deal back in the Amiga days. The Evercade launched alongside 10 different cartridges, which each contain a varying number of games, from around 6 up to 20 on the same cart. Another 4 additional cartridges have already been announced and are due to be released by the end of 2020. Blaze has also said they are hoping to release between 40 and 50 cartridges in total by the end of 2021. Before the console actually came out, I do have to say that I was a bit sceptical that it would ever see the light of day, because other companies have tried to do something similar and failed miserably. Not only does the Evercade really exist, however, it's also proving to be quite popular, with many retro collectors picking one up and quite a few YouTubers giving it coverage. I always intended to make my own videos about the Evercade, it's just taken me a while before I felt ready to start making them. First, my own system took quite a while to get to me thanks to the shipping delays that were brought on by what's currently going on in the world. Then I just haven't had the time to play the games thoroughly enough to give them a fair review. It's finally time for me to start my Evercade series though, and what better medium than Retrograde? I will be taking a look at the first 5 games from the first Evercade cartridge, which is the Atari Collection Volume 1. I will be giving each game a score out of 5 at the end like I always do. So that's enough preamble, let's get on with looking at the games. The first game on the cartridge is Alien Brigade for the Atari 7800, which rather oddly does mean that the games are slightly out of alphabetical order. I bet Blaze did this so that the very first game that people saw when they turned on their new console was a quite impressive one, because I do have to admit Alien Brigade still holds up remarkably well today. What you have here is basically an Operation Wolf clone, a light gun shooter which swaps out a lot of the military targets for hostile alien life forms. Some of the aliens still drive tanks or fly helicopters though, rather amusingly, and others have disguised themselves as regular human soldiers. It can be hard to distinguish between the Xenos and your own troops in the heat of battle. At the start of each mission, you will be given an opportunity to check in with your superiors and find out exactly what the orders for the mission are. This can be quite important because if you don't read these orders, you may not realise that the last helicopter in stage 1 is there to take the hostages you've freed away to safety, for example. Shooting down this helicopter results in failure and a game over. The next mission features a bunch of civilians just trying to enjoy their holiday at a resort, and killing too many of them either deliberately or accidentally will also mean failure. The designers of the game do have a tendency to place the aliens in front of the civilians though, so it can be all too easy to mow down the innocent at the same time as the aliens if you're too heavy on the fire button. With this being a game primarily designed for a light gun peripheral, I was a bit concerned that it would prove tricky and imprecise when played with a regular D-pad, but I needn't have worried. The controls feel good and I didn't really have too many problems hitting my targets. There are 4 difficulty settings to choose from and 5 stages to complete. The Atari 7800 never made it to the UK and it also wasn't a very big success in the United States after Atari held back the release so that it wouldn't adversely impact sales of their classic 2600 console, which is still proving to be incredibly popular. By the time the 7800 and its games were eventually allowed to be sold, it all felt a bit old hat to many consumers. It is therefore interesting to finally be playing these games now on officially sanctioned cartridges, and these 7800 games are definitely a very worthy inclusion to these collections. Overall, I would give Alien Brigade a very strong 4.5 out of 5, as it's one of the standout titles within their first collection. Let's move on now to Adventure for the Atari 2600. This game has gained fame and notoriety in recent years thanks to it being a key element in the plot of Ernest Cline's novel Ready Player One and its big screen adaptation by Steven Spielberg. Easter eggs are a big part of the story, and Adventure is of course the very first recorded example of an Easter egg hidden away in a video game. Warren Robinet was fed up with Atari because they would not give the programmers and designers, who were usually the same person at that point in time, any credit for the games that they were creating. He therefore put a hidden room in the game with his name in it. That's all well and good, but is Adventure actually decent, especially nowadays? Well, let's be honest here, it has aged quite a bit. The graphics are incredibly basic, but the gameplay can still be fun for a while. There are 3 different adventures for players to go on, which get increasingly more complicated. The first one can be beaten fairly easily, and should only take about 20 minutes or less if you know what you're doing. The others will take a bit more effort, but the game is far from the sort of sprawling adventure game you get nowadays. You have to remember though that this game came out in 1980, and the Atari 2600 wasn't very powerful. The simple square that depicts the player character and the duck-like dragons have become incredibly iconic, and the game is a very important part of video game history overall. When all is said and done though, I would award it 3 out of 5. It feels somewhat limited now, but I do feel its inclusion on this cartridge was vital. Let's move on to game number 3, which is another 2600 title, this time by the name of Aquaventure. This game was apparently never released back in the 80s, but it has since been included on several official Atari compilations, including this one. It's a shame that the game has not seen wider fame, because it's actually pretty enjoyable to play. It's a fairly basic arcade-style game, but it can still prove to be quite addictive. You take control of a deep-sea diver who is exploring the depths for treasure. You need to dodge the fish and other undersea wildlife as you descend to the chest of gold, and then on your way back up again. Finally, you must touch the mermaid at the ocean's surface to complete the level. The whole thing then repeats, but the treasure is even deeper. To make life a bit more stressful and complicated, you have a limited amount of air in which to get down to the ocean floor and back, depicted by a little turtle moving from left to right. If it makes it all the way to the right, then you drown and lose one of your lives. Visually, Aquaventure is a little bit more detailed than Adventure, with a nicely animated diver and some good shading effects on the fishies. My only minor gripe here would be that the diver sometimes is hard to make out against the colour of the background. They could have remedied this by making him a lighter shade such as yellow or white. This is a fun pick up and play score attack style game though, which I rather enjoy, so I'm going to give it a score of 4 out of 5. The penultimate game for this episode is the Atari 2600 version of Asteroids. This highlights one of my big problems with the Evercade so far, in that they have a tendency to include inferior versions of a game when there are much better ones available, and sometimes even repeat the same game in different collections. So far, no arcade games have been included on any of the Evercade cartridges, but they have said that they are working on some arcade collections for the future. The arcade version of Asteroids is undoubtedly the best one and should really have been included. Likewise with other games like Crystal Castles and Tempest that we will get to later. When it comes to Asteroids though, the Atari 2600 version may look a bit ugly, but in terms of gameplay it is still pretty enjoyable and true to the original. I expect most of you out there are familiar with the concept of this game, but just in case you're not, you control a little spaceship that starts in the centre of the screen and can be rotated in 360 degrees. Asteroids will be coming from all angles of the screen and it is your task to shoot them so that they break down into smaller pieces and are eventually destroyed. You have thrusters to move around the screen, but it is recommended that you stay stationary for as long as you can. You also have a hyperspace, which is really only a last resort because it is quite unpredictable and can put you right in the path of danger. Eventually a UFO will also start appearing, which will shoot at you. Again, like many arcade games of this era, Asteroids feels pretty basic now, but it is easy to pick up and play and fun in small doses. I'm going to award it a score of 3.5 out of 5. It's never been one of my favourite games, but I enjoy the odd go now and again. The final game I'm going to look at in this episode is Canyon Bomber. It was originally an arcade game in 1977 and then was brought over to the Atari 2600 the following year. You and either a computer opponent or another human take control of various types of flying vehicles such as planes, jets and blimps and attempt to drop bombs on as many rocks as you can as you fly over them. After a certain amount of time the game ends and the player with the higher score wins. This game can be a bit of fun when played with a real person, but it's rather boring against the computer, and they are also very hard to beat. The cartridge also features another mode called Sea Bomber, where you're trying to drop bombs on various aircraft characters and other ships. The gameplay doesn't change very much, but the targets are a lot smaller. I found it incredibly difficult to hit anything in this mode, I'm not sure why. This is easily my least favourite game of the ones I've looked at today, and I would only give it a score of 2 out of 5. So that brings me to the end of part 1, but there will be 3 more parts to come with another 5 games apiece. Did you play any of these games back in the day? If so, what was your favourite? I hope you decide to join me again next time. In the meantime, take care.